I can't get that night out of my head. Even months later, it still haunts me every time I close my eyes. I was alone in Sector B, as usual, and the hum of old maintenance filled the tunnel's metallic steps. Faint laughter, machines starting by themselves. And then I saw her, tall, motionless, but somehow aware. There was no real face, just a shifting reflection over the polished metal of the cables and walls. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the flickering light, playing tricks through rusted frames. But the feeling of being watched, that was real. I started my night shift at Sunshine Kingdom, an abandoned amusement complex in North Carolina now under partial restoration. My assignment was simple: routine inspection of electrical panels, valves, and ventilation systems in the lower sectors. Sector B, they told me, still had power from the old circuits unstable, but functional enough for monitoring. The place was a labyrinth of metal corridors and damp walls. Each step echoed through the hollow maintenance shafts. My flashlight beam cut through floating dust, catching the shapes of disconnected pipes and faded safety signs. The air smelled like rust and stale chemicals. Around 2 in the morning, the lights above me flickered. One by one, they blinked in sequence like a ripple spreading through the hallway. The motion sensors came alive for a few seconds, logging activity, even though I was standing still. I checked the panel. No anomalies reported. No one else clocked in. I recorded a quick note on my handheld recorder. The faint metallic clicking, the low vibration from the generators, and the constant, pulsing hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I didn't think much of it then. Old circuits act up all the time. But that sound, that hum, never stopped. It followed me through the entire night. 2 nights later, I returned for another inspection. The corridor to Sector B smelled different, a mix of ozone and burned insulation. When I reached the main relay point, I froze. The cable setup was wrong. Someone had rearranged them. I reviewed the schematics from the last maintenance order. The configuration didn't match. Several wires were rerouted through older ducts that hadn't been used since the 1980s. I pulled the service log for confirmation, and that's when I saw it. The signature on the document, it belonged to Thomas Kina, a technician who died in 1984 during a substation fire in the same complex. I double-checked everything, certain it was a clerical error or a prank, but the more I examined it, the more wrong it felt. The energy lines connected themselves, like the system had a mind of its own. When I cut the power to the rearranged cables, the main generator didn't shut down. It hummed louder, steadier, as if compensating for my interference. I recorded everything: dates, voltages, relay behavior. I kept my notes technical, rational, but in the back of my mind, one question wouldn't go away. Who had reconnected the circuits after all this time? By the 3rd week, my audio logs began to pick up more than just static. At first, it was faint, a soft shuffle, like someone dragging a wrench across the floor. 10 laughter, low and short, echoing through the ducts. Machines powered up by themselves for a few seconds, then stopped. I tried explaining it. Vibration resonance. Maybe old infrastructure can mimic footsteps when pressure equalizes in the pipes. But when I listened back to the recordings, the patterns were unmistakable, perfectly timed, almost routine, like someone repeating their old work schedule. That's when I saw it. I was inspecting a cooling pipe near the northern wall. The metal was polished enough to reflect light, and for half a second, I saw a human shape in that reflection, standing behind me, motionless. When I turned around, nothing, only cables and the empty corridor. I stood there, staring at the spot for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of light. But deep down I already knew something had changed. The sounds weren't just random anymore. They were deliberate, intentional, and whatever was down there, it remembered. By the end of the month, strange reports began showing up on my desk. Printed forms, slightly yellowed, but with fresh ink. They listed electrical readings from Sector B, all dated within the last week. The Problem? The signatures at the bottom belonged to technicians dead for over 30 years. At first, I thought it was a joke. The names matched perfectly. Thomas Keener, Martha Doyle. Both listed in the archives as victims of the 1984 fire. Yet every time a new form appeared, I'd find something changed in the tunnels. Wires rerouted, panels cleaned, solder marks fresh. Someone, or something, was working down there. I checked the entry logs. No one had badged in. My supervisor told me to ignore it, but I couldn't. The handwriting, the layout, even the old formatting software wasn't available anymore. Still, the forms kept coming. I began marking every discovery in my notebook. Hour, voltage, temperature. The data didn't lie. Sector B was active. I stopped asking who was fixing it. I started asking why. The first motion alert came just after midnight. The system registered movement inside a sealed shaft, one that hadn't been open since the late 80s. I reset the sensor twice, but the signal returned stronger. Steady, rhythmic, like footsteps. I compared the logs with old maintenance charts. The pattern of movement matched perfectly with an archived shift schedule from 1984. Same timing, same path. When I checked the live feed, the image flickered. For 2 seconds, I saw a metallic silhouette walking past the cables. Slow, methodical, unaware of the camera. It turned toward the lens, and the frame cut to static. The noise in the tunnels grew louder after that. Clanging metal, faint laughter, echoing from nowhere. I stood still, recording the sound in my head, afraid to move. The machines hummed again, syncing with the rhythm of those unseen steps. Whatever was moving down there wasn't random. It was routine, like a worker still on shift. I went down myself the next night. The sublevel air was heavy with moisture and the faint temps of chemicals. The hum of power lines pulsed through the metal floor. My flashlight beam trembled across rusted pipes and cables, catching dust like fog. Halfway through the corridor, the vibrations changed, more defined, almost like a heartbeat beneath the floor. I followed it to an old distribution junction. The panels there looked freshly serviced, and in the reflection of a metal plate, I saw her. She stood at the far end of the tunnel, motionless. The light distorted her shape. Tall, featureless, but human. I called out, and my voice came back doubled. One echo too many, repeating my words with a delay. I raised the light again. The reflection scattered. She was gone. I wrote down everything. Distance, temperature, sound. Data was the only thing that made sense, but I couldn't ignore the truth forming in my mind. Something beneath Sector B wasn't decaying. It was alive, waiting, and working. After weeks of irregular readings, I turned the surveillance system into a full diagnostic hub. Every sound, temperature shift, and vibration was time-stamped. I played each recording at reduced speed to trace patterns. What I found made no sense. The same frequencies appeared every night at the same intervals, perfectly matching the maintenance cycles logged before 1984. At first, I thought it was interference from old circuits, but when I adjusted the sensitivity, the pattern shifted as if responding to me. Tap for tap, pulse for pulse. The microphone even caught what seemed like a metallic exhale, rhythmic, patient, almost alive. I spent that night documenting every detail. The reflection showed again on the far end of the monitor. Tall, static, but shimmering faintly in the flicker of emergency lights. I leaned closer, waiting for motion. Instead, the image dimmed slowly, fading back into the dark corridor. I logged the timestamp, 2:43 a.m. I kept writing until dawn. The entries became less technical and more personal. I wasn't supposed to, but I noted what I felt. That sense of being mirrored. Whatever moved down there wasn't random. It was following procedure. The next phase of inspection required physical entry into the restricted conduits. Access was officially denied, but the system's own scheduler kept opening the locks every night at 1:12 a.m. I followed once, host, onse. The deeper I went, the stronger the resonance became, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the metal walkways. The air shimmered like heat above asphalt. My instruments flickered, sensors alternating between live and offline as if overwhelmed by the signal. I turned off the lights to reduce glare. The corridor glowed faintly with its own reflection. a network of mirrored steel and moisture. Then came the footsteps, not echoing mine, but moving ahead. Faster, deliberate. I froze, holding my breath. The sound stopped too, the hum intensified, and every surface seemed to pulse once, like a heartbeat in metal. I stepped back. The reflection moved forward. I didn't record what happened next. Some things you don't analyze, you just survive. I submitted my final report to the municipal board this morning. All the evidence, the logs, recordings, and motion readings was cataloged and sealed. Official conclusion: residual vibrations, electromagnetic interference, and sensor desynchronization due to corrosion. That's what they wanted to read. That's what I wrote. But in the final paragraph, hidden between technical jargon, he left a note. I wrote that the system might still be active, not in a mechanical sense, but as a form of continuation, like an echo of every worker who ever walked those tunnels, repeating their last routines forever. Before leaving, I passed by Sector B. One last time, the lights were steady, the air still. Yet when I reached the service elevator, I heard a single tap against the metal railing, precise, deliberate, the same cadence as mine. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. It's strange hearing the park lights again after all these years. The new company calls it a technical reopening. Limited access, only for internal evaluation. They hired a private security team, gave us radios, body cams, and the same schedule the old staff used before the fire. Maryland, they said, still had potential. On my first night, the operator at the control center, a guy named Reed, sent me to investigate an anomaly near the Hall of Mirrors. Just a motion glitch, he said, voice breaking with static. I took the flashlight across the empty midway rides covered by tarps, wind playing with old banners. Inside the mirror hall, every reflection flickered under the emergency lights. The air felt electric. Then I heard it, a soft, uneven sound, like footsteps behind the glass. My radio hissed, and through the noise, a faint female voice whispered something I couldn't make out. The sound didn't come from the hallway. It came from the speakers above me. I froze, staring at my reflection. But it didn't move when I did. Chapter 1. The training manual said it clearly. If you see a reflection without a matching body, log it and move on. Old glass can cause optical misreads. That's what I told myself. But the first night I logged one, I couldn't convince myself it was just glass. It happened around 2:40 a.m. The camera feed from corridor B7 showed movement, a figure passing between the mirrors, tall, slow. I went in to check, expecting nothing. My flashlight beam split across a dozen panels, showing me 100 versions of myself. Then, one reflection lingered when I turned. It was a woman, her head tilted slightly, walking in the wrong direction. Control. Visual distortion at B7, I said into the radio. Reed's reply came delayed, his voice echoing like it bounced off metal. Copy that, ... Log the incident. Don't stay in there too long. I noted it in my report. Female reflection. Approximate height, 1.7 meters. No physical source. I tried to forget it, but her image followed me in the glare of every screen after that. By the third night, the static became constant. The intercom would wake on its own, humming like a radio between stations. Then, faint melodies began seeping through the noise. A carousel tune, laughter, old park jingles that hadn't played in decades. Reed stayed calm, tapping keys on his console. Probably cross-frequency bleed, he said, adjusting the gain. But the voices had rhythm, timing, and sometimes they spoke names. Once, I heard my own. We traced the line and found it linked to a dead circuit from the old public announcement system. Reed ran diagnostics, shaking his head. This channel shouldn't even have voltage. He muted it, but the sound returned an hour later, clearer. That time, it wasn't music. It was a recording of a woman laughing softly, repeating a line that froze me. Turn the lights back on. Reed looked at me and whispered, "That's from the 2012 fire logs." It was the last transmission recorded before the line went dead. Sensor 03B triggered every night at exactly las 3:07 alto m. The motion logs always showed the same pattern. Movement detected inside the Hall of Mirrors, long after we'd sealed it off. I went there again, this time with Reed monitoring remotely. Movement confirmed, he said through the headset. Be methodical, Alvarez. His voice was flat. Professional, the tone of someone trying not to sound afraid. I swept the flashlight along the mirrored walls. My reflection shimmered, multiplied endlessly. Then one of the shadows, one that looked like me, didn't follow. It turned the other way. Reed, I said quietly, I think there's someone in here. Static answered. The radios crackled with overlapping signals, like two voices speaking from the same channel. One current, one recorded. The lights flickered, and every mirror filled with the same image. Two security guards standing side by side. Red and me, though I was alone. When the system reset, the motion log erased itself. Only the time stamp remained. 3:07 a.m. Reed said he'd run a diagnostic. I watched the monitors while he loaded the old recordings maintenance logs from before the park shut down. The sound was grainy, filled with static. Then, clear as daylight, a woman's voice broke through. I'm still inside. Reed froze. The time stamp on the feed read the 14th of May 2012. The night of the fire, he traced the signal and confirmed the channel was deactivated years ago. No current input, no patch to any active frequency. We replayed it. Same voice, same sentence. No distortion this time. Reed looked at me, pale, whispering that she'd worked in the Hall of Mirrors. I wanted to believe it was just data corruption, a bleed over from the old system. But the voice didn't sound old. It sounded present. Before we shut it off, it said something else, quieter. Don't lock me in. The next morning, Corporate sent a memo. Any unidentified voice must be acknowledged with the code phrase "Operation in Progress." Nothing more. No personal response. No investigation. During my next patrol, I followed protocol. Each time I heard someone whispering my name through the static, I replied with the code. The system clicked each time like it was acknowledging me back. Reed said the interference was jumping channels, traveling along the cabling network. He disconnected 3 radios and still caught a voice echoing from one that wasn't even powered. It called his name this time. He looked at me across the console. It's moving through the lines, he said, like it knows the system better than we do. We ran diagnostics across all channels. The logs showed simultaneous playback of both current and archived transmissions. Reed thought it was just data overlap, until the recordings began responding. When he tried to delete the backlog, the console repeated his command in the same tone, just milliseconds after he spoke. His hands shook as he stopped typing. "It's mimicking input," he said. I watched the feed from the Hall of Mirrors. The reflection of the control room flickered on the glass, but our movements were out of sync. When I raised my hand, the reflection delayed, then waved first. Reed whispered, "That's not a delay." The next second, our radios activated themselves. A voice's own came through. Archive deletion confirmed, but he hadn't touched the console. The timestamps didn't add up. Every video from the night before had a duplicate, the same camera angle, the same frame, but off by 2 or 3 seconds. One was labeled normally, the other carried the tag, internal mirror feed. I thought it was a system backup, until I played them side by side. In one, Alvarez turned left. In the other, right. Same time code. When I showed him, he laughed it off, said the playback buffer probably glitched. But that night, while checking live cams, I saw him in corridor 03B, standing perfectly still before a mirror. I called his radio. He answered instantly from the control room, sitting right beside me. I looked at him, then back to the screen. Both Alvarezes turned their heads at once. He froze. The man next to me whispered, "That's not me." The radio crackled. A soft voice, female, said, "Keep watching the reflection." For the first time, I muted the monitor feed, but the movement continued, even with no signal. The other Alvarez kept standing there, breathing, fogging the glass from the wrong side. Central Command. Could, uplink. We were told to continue manual reports. Until further notice, Alvarez wrote everything by hand, refusing to touch the monitors anymore. The only sounds left were the humming of the backup generators and the intermittent buzz of our radios. Then, sometime around 2 a.m., the interference started again, snippets of old reports, overlapping. Static formed full sentences. My own voice from previous nights. I listened closely. The playback wasn't random. It followed our movements, echoing them seconds before we made them. When I spoke, the voice repeated the same words, delayed, as if the system was predicting my speech. Alvarez panicked. He insisted there was still someone inside the mirror corridors, fulfilling the old patrol routes. He swore he could see flashlight beams flickering behind the glass panels, moving in opposite rhythm to ours. We traced the interference. It led to an audio line that hadn't been active since 2012, the operator's cabin that burned down, the one belonging to the woman whose voice said, "I'm still inside." The operation ended quietly. Officially, the cause listed was unrecoverable system D. I filed the last report at 4:10, recommending the site remain sealed. My transfer request was approved an hour later. Before leaving, I played back the final tape, just to make sure the logs were archived. The tape started normally, status updates, ambient noise, static. Then, my own voice repeated the entry from the night before, not recorded. Live. I could hear myself breathing on both channels. The delay grew shorter with every second until both tracks aligned perfectly. Weeks later, they assigned a new technician to Maryland. I heard his name during orientation. Ruka. When he played the archive tapes. He must have heard me saying, "Night shift report, all systems stable." But what he probably didn't notice was the faint sound behind Ida's second voice, typing commands into the console. It was still recording. I still see that clown, not like a costume, but like something fused with the night itself. His shoulders were bent forward, his stance stiff. That painted smile stretched afar, so far it became impossible to tell if he was grinning or just watching me. The lights along the roller coaster flickered, and each reflection on the polished rails brought his figure closer, more human, and yet impossible. His eyes weren't normal. They were too white, too still, as if the paint and glass had absorbed some old kind of awareness. The air around me felt heavy, damp, almost sticky, like the park itself was holding its breath. Every step I took made his shadow stretch in the wrong direction, and for one unbearable moment, I swore he moved only to see me better. They gave me the original Fairview Hills security tapes, 25 years of dust-sealed and magnetic reels. The footage was static and decay, but I could make out the shapes of families, children, laughter, frozen mid-frame. And then I saw him, a clown, standing still at the far end of the ride. He appeared again in the next camera, and again, always facing the lens, different angles, same posture, same blank focus. There was no record of any performer in that costume. I wrote my notes, but my hands shook. The longer I stared, the more his painted grin seemed to widen between frames, as if the tape was breathing. I told myself it was compression, a trick of light, but every flicker of those bulbs carried that face closer to me, waiting inside the film. By the third night, I was certain something was wrong with the footage itself. The clown was in nearly every camera within 50 feet of the ride, frozen in place, yet always closer to the lens. Sometimes his shoulder would blur past another frame, too quick for an actor, too exact for coincidence. My producer said it was a lens flare, but when I paused the image, his reflection filled the glass around my own face on the monitor. I began turning off the lights in the studio. It didn't help. The more I watched, the colder the air grew, like the tape carried its own temperature. There's a moment timestamp 20:41 where I swear I can see my reflection standing behind him. We restored the audio from the tapes next. I wasn't expecting anything, just a low hum of the park's electric systems. But in the silent gaps between the static, there was something faint. Not speech, breathing. And then, faintly, the rhythm of a child's laughter. I checked the waveform. It was embedded deep in the track, impossible to edit or fake without altering the original. The laugh matched the ride's theme song, The Laughing Lights. Same pitch, same cadence. I interviewed the sound engineer who installed the system. He told me those test reels weren't from Fairview Hills at all. They'd been reused, copied from a carnival decades before Amelia Croft vanished. He said the company went bankrupt after a ride fire. I didn't ask him more. I didn't want to know what the fire left behind. Researching old carnival records became my obsession. The laughter track, embedded in the ride, they said, was used decades ago in itinerant shows, long before Fairview Hills existed. The oddity was that it had never been associated with children directly, only performers and machinery. Digging through old newspapers, I found accounts of spectators describing a clown standing still, staring, even before Amelia vanished. It sent chills through me, the consistency of it all. The figure on the tapes, the reflections I thought I imagined, now had precedent. It wasn't confined to memory. It had been seen, noted, and documented decades ago. Each frame I analyzed seemed to hold the same oppressive gaze, as if he had existed outside time, waiting for anyone to notice. The pattern wasn't just in my footage anymore, it was historical, unbroken, and profoundly unsettling. I felt as though my eyes were following his every motion, even when I tried to focus elsewhere. The studio air thickened around me, the lights too bright, the shadows too deep. Something persistent had survived the years, and it was looking straight at anyone who dared to watch. I stayed late, alone, reviewing the footage again. The hum of the monitors filled the room, a white noise that should have been comforting but wasn't. My heart quickened, and I felt heat creeping up my neck, as if the room itself had noticed me. In the corner of my vision, I thought I saw movement, but when I turned, nothing was there. The clown's figure remained on the screen, unwavering, yet somehow closer than before. Each flicker of the ride lights seemed synchronized with my pulse, each reflection stretching him unnaturally across metal rails. My skin prickled. I was aware of every muscle twitch, every shadow cast by my own body. The experience was no longer passive. It felt alive, reactive, even as I rationalized the angles, the shadows, the camera tricks. The feeling persisted that someone or something was observing me from the footage, following me, aware of me. I could not stop watching, even as fear rooted me to the chair. Hours of frame-by-frame comparison yielded an eerie result. The laughter track coincided with Amelia's final recorded movements. Every flicker of the lights, every jolt of the ride, aligned perfectly with her last known steps, and with the clown's gaze. The reflection in his eyes, unnervingly white, seemed to mirror hers. My team debated the phenomenon, skeptical yet disturbed. There was no digital manipulation, no human in the costume, no explanation in logic. The presence was consistent and undeniable. Watching it, I could feel a direct connection across decades: child, clown, ride, and me, all entangled in one frame. The footage wasn't just recording events anymore. It was containing them, preserving something too persistent to ignore. I could not look away, and I knew that the truth, whatever it was, waited at the center of the tracks, where the figure of Amelia and the clown converged, silent and eternal. I was alone, reviewing a late-night recording of the ride when I saw it. A small figure, barely more than a shadow at first, standing directly in the center of the tracks. The child's smile was unsettlingly wide, reflecting the same ghostly white as the clown's eyes. Every flicker of the ride's light seemed to pulse around her, syncing with my own heartbeat. I could feel her gaze through the screen, piercing, assessing. The sensation was immediate, like she knew I was watching, like the video itself had become a conduit. I leaned closer, my breath shallow, convinced the reflections on the rails moved in tandem with her tiny, frozen movements. For a moment, time dilated. The studio's fluorescent lights dimmed, and all I could see was the figure between the rails, silent yet profoundly present. I whispered her name, but no sound emerged. The footage, the figure, the clownlet, all felt like a trap, pulling me into the past, to witness Amelia's last moments, unblinking and eternal. The transmission came without warning. A single file labeled only with a date from long ago. I opened it in silence, the studio air tight around me. The ride was illuminated, all the lights blinking in sync, painting the empty tracks in harsh strobe. There she was again, the child standing motionless, smiling directly at the camera. The clown's painted grin mirrored her gaze perfectly. The audio had no source, yet the laughter echoed in the room, seeming to react to my movement. I felt eyes on me from beyond the screen, a presence that made my chest tighten. It was no longer just footage. It was interaction, something aware of my observation, aware of my breathing. I leaned back, trembling, unable to rationalize the experience. The entity, the combination of child and clown, existed both on tape and in some persistent space beyond, watching, waiting, acknowledging my intrusion into its record. I finished the podcast, voice shaky, notes scattered. Every description, every frame, every laugh had been recorded for listeners, but not all could be conveyed through sound or image alone. The presence of the clown and Amelia lingered in my memory, a shadow beyond the studio walls. It was a weight that did not lift when the lights went off, a sensation that stayed after the recordings ended. I spoke to the audience in first person, recounting the horrors I had observed, the inexplicable patterns, the echoes of a tragedy that refused to remain in the past. The laughter, the eyes, the figure on the tracks, they persisted. They watched, and I knew, even beyond the podcast, that the haunting was ongoing, the record eternal, and the entity continued to observe any who dared to look too closely.